Denise.
Hey.
So if knowledge is so political, can you really be as neutral as you claim?
Actually, I had a question for you that I want to start with. We'll get back to that one if you really want to do it. Have you ever used a real paper encyclopedia?
Yes, I have.
How
old do you think I am?
I'm checking. Do you think you're one of the last to do that?
Quite likely. Yes, it's been a while since I consulted them. One for actual knowledge, although they're a lot of fun to look at for a window into historical ways of looking at knowledge. In fact, on the last trip out to the Long Now Clock site, alongside the stocks of toilet paper in the porta potties, we had copies of Encyclopedia Britannica for us to peruse during those, moments.
Now, how lovely is that?
How lonely?
How lovely is that?
Well, I think
was it a choice thing? Because that paper's really thin.
You could have looked at it that way, and I noticed that I think we had M's, the end of the M's volume, and a number of the mushroom identification pages had been ripped out for future reference. But no, it's actually a beautiful way of coming to knowledge, which is entirely complementary to the Wikipedia mode, I think, because there's more room for the serendipitous discovery of adjacency, like in the Dewey Decimal System, when you're in that section of the library. And I think we haven't quite figured out a way to recover that dimension of discovery in the electronic realm yet.
Well, Ted Nelson would say that doesn't matter, right? The hyperlink is the whole thing, but I know what you're talking about. I love encyclopedias. I actually read the encyclopedia in my house when I was a kid, which was a strange way to spend your childhood, but There you have it. And so it's kind of funny that I'd end up at Wikipedia, given that, right? But I was thinking when they were talking about, in a previous conversation, they were talking about the airship thing. I actually got an opportunity to ride on the airship. Have you been on it yet?
I have not, no.
Yeah, so it's slow, right? It takes forever. But one of the features of Wikipedia, and in fact the whole internet, is knowledge can now pour into your brain as fast as you can consume it, or maybe faster than you can consume it.
Right.
And there's some evidence that at least the current generation of humans aren't really wired for that much information. Like, people get sick from it. And likewise from flying too much and too much speed and too much, But I'm wondering, because I have 3 24-year-old kids, and they're wired differently.
That sounds like an interesting story.
Yeah.
But
they're not triplets,
okay.
But they're wired differently, and I think in the context of the existing school system, it's seen as a problem the way they're wired.
Right.
But I'm wondering if it isn't an asset in the long run.
Well, I think when you talk about how we're wired, there are a couple of layers to that, at least, and our plasticity as humans is absolutely extraordinary, I think. I particularly like a comment that Douglas Adams made, the Hitchhiker's Guide author, who said that anything invented after you turn 15 is technology. Right. So before that, it's just the air that you breathe, and up to a certain age, we sort of just accept the world in a sense as we find it and adapt to that. So I think there are generational distinctions here, but I don't think that. It doesn't make as much sense to me to say that we're not wired for certain levels of information. I think we're perhaps not educated for them, and that schools are kind of catching on kind of slowly. Universities even more slowly to the reality of how people actually like to consume their information and their entertainment and everything else. But I see those changes sort of as being more possible from generation to generation than within a generation. Because after a certain age, it just gets harder.
We did some surveys of who the people that contribute to Wikipedia are, and their average is, in their early 20s, they're white, they're male, they're in some CS department somewhere, they're up late.
Now, was this across the language
Well, it's a problem because
or is this just
it's
the
who
English
responds
language
to the
Wikipedia?
survey, unfortunately.
Okay, right.
And I think there have been surveys in the other languages, but really the bulk of the editors are in the English and German and French
Right, but
versions.
so that told you that people who like to respond to surveys are white and
there you
male
go.
and in their early
there you
20s.
go.
Right.
But when we go meet editors, you know, we see something slightly different, but not hugely different. I had this amazing meeting with, we call her the snail lady, this woman that is a mollusk specialist who's now a housewife.
Uh-huh.
And she's spending all of her time like plumping up the mollusks in Wikipedia, you know, right?
Right.
And she's totally passionate about it. She actually told me she sees it as her legacy, like this is going to persist. Of all the things I've worked on, you know, my thesis, this is actually going to persist, which I'm wondering, is that why you got involved in the clock, something that will persist?
Not exactly. I mean, and I'm sort of right at the other end of it from the engineering end. I'm sort of interested in the conversation like this and all the other ones that spin off from it, which the clock and all the other Long Now projects are kind of intended to engender. But so it's not so much that I'm interested in a personal legacy, but that I see value in this type of work and, you know, want to sort of walk the talk in a sense, be as involved as I can be in those things which I think are urgently needed. And, you know, improving our engagement with the longer term is something that is urgently needed, even though, you know, by its very nature, part of the problem is that we don't see the reason for that, or a lot of people don't see the value of thinking longer term.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to ask you something that you touched on in your conversation with Peter about the difference between well, it sounded like there were 3 layers. There's Wikipedia, or all the various Wikipedias in different languages, the Wikimedia Foundation, which supports that, and then the movement that you referred to. And you made that distinction between Wikipedia as an artifact, an evolving artifact of knowledge, and the movement behind it. Can you say a little bit more about the movement and what's going on there?
Well, it's interesting because the movement is trying to figure itself out right now. You know, sort of as we speak, they're working on a project called the Movement Roles, where they try to sort out different people's jobs. I mean, it's grown organically, and of course, some people are natural leaders, some people have more influence or are, you know, more persuasive, and over time, certain cultures have emerged, if you will. But yeah, it's interesting to me. So the foundation was not founded first, right? The Wikipedia was a few years old when the foundation happened, and it was created as a you know, vehicle to hold the finances to keep the website running, because it's not cheap, you know, right? I'm on a mail list about foundations and how to keep them running, because I've been involved in open source for so long, and there's 1 million open source foundations, and they're getting to the place where not everybody can raise money to keep their foundation open. So what do we do? Do we, like, you know, move them all together? Because open source people are fundamentally futurists too, right? They looked at the software industry and went, oh, this is so broken. And instead of saying, well, you know, I guess I'm going to spend my 30 years this way and then I'm going to, you know, do the next thing, they went, we could change this. And they kind of rolled their sleeves up and started changing it, right? And now here, 10 years on, they've got this problem. They said, well, you don't have that problem, Denise, because, you know, you guys make all your money from individual donations, and that's still true. So for some, you know, level of truth, the movement is the 600,000 people who give us an average of $30.
Okay.
You know, right? I mean, we're really actually funded that way by individual people, mostly. By and large, 80% of our money comes that way, which tells me that people who use Wikipedia and find it useful want to see it persist, and they appreciate that we don't have advertisement and blah, 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 right?
But it doesn't end at the boundaries of the donation of donors, does it? I mean, because it seems to me that move, well, if you want to cordon it off, there's that movement, and then there's all those other open space initiatives that you referred to. I mean, how do they relate?
Well, you mean the open source stuff?
Well, right, yes, sorry, open source.
Right, so open source as a set of rules that say basically, if I give you a gift of my work, that work should continue to be available to me forever.
Right.
That's basically what open source says. I should be able to reuse that work because it's a gift. And in fact, everybody should be able to reuse that work, right? So starting with source code, which is the easiest way to understand it, I'm writing this program and I'm going to open it, and that means that if you come along later and you find a way to fix it, you can, and it's a better project because
it's anti-copyright.
It's anti-copyright. Well, it's a new form of copyright is what it is. It uses copyright to protect itself. We called it copyleft, right? So, people who read Wikipedia are not often aware of that. You know, my mom reads Wikipedia, and she doesn't know much about the politics of that movement. But the people who donate the edits, they're very much those people. They're giving because it makes them feel good to give, and they're hopeful that their donation of time and knowledge is going to benefit the world in the long run. I mean, they're pretty much always that, you know, organized that way. Sometimes they want to see their special subject covered better because it needs better coverage, or they believe it does. But fundamentally, they're trying to give a gift to the future, right? And in a way that it's reusable. So that donor community that I mentioned before, they're part of the readership, right? So 6% of the human population of the world reads Wikipedia every month now, according to page views. And in the next 5 years, we're going to try to double that. And when we say that, we're talking about reaching more people, not like sort of increasing our market share, but having more people get the benefit of the knowledge and take some ownership. But one of our basic tenets, because of that open source thing, when a new country starts a wiki, they have to show up and participate because participation is ownership.
Right.
And one of the things that the internet gives us is another opportunity to participate. So for the whole Industrial Revolution, we were sort of, you know, kept away from the means of production, right, as consumers. But now consumers are also producers.
Right. No, and that's sort of part of what I was getting at with the question about the movement, because although your mother might not be donating edits, as a reader, she is part of a broader movement,
yeah.
You know,
of
humanity,
absolutely.
which is, you know, dismantling old hierarchies and infrastructures and replacing them with new ones. And I mean, that's the level at which I find this really fascinating. I Freudian slipped before and said open space rather than open source.
Which is now, also very interesting, though. Yeah, open space is really cool.
Right, so open space as an alternative way of organizing conferences and conversations, and, you know, unconferences are another sort of frame for it that you can...
Which the open source community kind of embraced,
right.
Thanks partly to Tim O'Reilly, right? But we all just sort of dove right into that. And yeah, I met Stewart Brand at an unconference. Of course I did, you know.
Right, but this, I mean, sort of handing the resources to people so that they can self-structure their own inquiry and their own conversations and their own learning is, I think, you know, a really kind of fascinating
and getting
broader trend of which Wikimedia, Wikipedia, and the donors and all of that movement are a really important part.
Well, people getting used to the idea that the entitlement of the future is the ability to participate. It used to be the ability to, you know, hang around and wait for somebody to give you a gift. And when we go into the developing world, getting them to understand that this isn't a U.S. corporation coming in for them to, you know, milk for whatever we have to offer. This is for them to do something. Sometimes it's a shift. It takes a minute for them to get, you know, right? Because there have been so many waves of aid, like the Peace Corps stuff that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
This is about, no, really, this is yours. It's only going to be as good as what you do with it. We don't write it.
Well, I want to take us back to the governance question, but a slightly different angle than what Peter was asking. And, you know, I wonder what lessons there are in this work you're involved in for how we might structure our governing institutions, you know, for governing society itself. That's not something that I've seen very much commentary on, but you must have some thoughts on it.
Well, it's an interesting question. So Wikipedia is, you get an immediate reaction from your action. You edit, you can see your edit, but it may be that just seconds later, your edit will get deleted. In the current state of Wikipedia, deletionism is an interesting trend. The problem is we get so many views and that there is some real value to that, and I mean a monetary value to having your thing be on our website for some second or two. And so we have a fair amount of spam people because we offer the opportunity for anonymous accounts to do edits. So what ends up happening is people have written bots that go through and scrub new edits looking for likely spam, right? And I think it's really disheartening to new participants. And I think if this were going to translate into a form of government, there'd have to be a check or balance created that slows the process enough that that people's real, there isn't so much thrash, basically. The thrash is very expensive. You know how when Obama started asking people good ideas, what are your good ideas? And the number one idea was legalize pot, man, right?
That went right to the top of the list.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Now, we live in California. That's actually going to happen soon, yay. But it's not the most pressing question, right? And that happens in Wikipedia, too, where human nature sort of conspires to sometimes create a false sense, and the thrash, the amount of yes, no, yes, no, yes, no that happens in people reverting each other's edits and then reinforcing them, going back and forth, is unfortunate, and I think would probably slow down government at the end of the day. We see that now. I mean, we're seeing it right now because we're about to have an election in the form of dueling TV commercials and radio commercials. Like, how much do you hate that, right? It turns people off to the whole process. So something would have to change there. But the idea that everybody gets an equal opportunity to rise all the way to, some kind of custodial behavior with a fairly low barrier to entry and good work being cumulatively offering more, a meritocracy, wouldn't be a bad thing, I think, in government.
I mean, in the example you've just given, meritocracy and democracy are in tension. Because the more people you open it to, the more thrash you get, and the more of that sort of toing and froing. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, but then somebody's got to make the tough decisions, right? And how to get those done. I mean, even in my daily job, simple things like, we're going to create a new data center because we need a better data center. And there are at least 500 people with opinions about how we ought to do that. But at the end of the day, I have to get it done, and so I have to make some decisions. I'm not sure how you balance that stuff now. I mean, in the bicameral plus executive body way that we do things now, it's meant to create this thing, this checks and balance thing. But it was also done 200 years ago for a much slower time and a much different way of interacting. Not that we have the perfect system, but it's interesting because nationalists in America think that this needs to go everywhere in the world. My experience of being in the Peace Corps is they could do without some of our ideas, frankly, particularly layered onto their culture without a whole lot of understanding of where they live and who they are and all that stuff. So I think there's some potential there. The tools are going to have to get better.
Right.
And then we have the problem of, is the internet going to persist, and can we trust it? I believe that we'll figure out how to make the internet really bulletproof at some point, but we're going to go through some thrash first,
Have any open source advocates systematically attempted to apply that thinking to political governance?
Actually, the big place you see this is people wanting the voting system to be open, the code to be visible, so that there's less opportunity for misuse and fraud and all that stuff. And there are a lot of people working on that. That I think it's unlikely that system won't fall. I mean, what happens with open source is there's some entrenched business interest. It's an old business model. Where you see this with music, right?
Right.
It's an old business model. The new wave washes through, and they're forced to the table because it's so obvious to casual people or users or somebody who gets to make a vote. With their feet usually, and then the old one falls, and the new thing is the way we do things now. That's like music downloads, right? So I think we don't have any countries yet that are governed by open source, if that's what you mean. I think
I'm not sure if voting goes far enough.
We're still experimenting within the open source movement about the ideal way to manage things. There's still very famous projects where everybody's kind of mean to each other. Well, we're trying for generosity. So
it's a good thing to try for.
Yeah,
Thanks, Denise.
Thank you.